Thank you for taking the time to come and join us to the Who Voted for Trump in 2016 and Will They Do So Again webinar arranged by the FIIA Center for U.S. Power and Politics. My name is Charly Salonius-Pasternak. I'm a senior research fellow here at FIIA and your moderator for today. Before I let Maria Annala take over, I just have a few housekeeping things which I've been trying to put into the chat also. So mics and cameras off. Everyone seems to be following that well. And please type your questions into the chat as we go along. It'll be much easier. You won't forget them. And I will have some time to compile them if they don't all arrive within 30 seconds once Maria is done talking. The session will be recorded. However, only the two speakers will be identified. And of course, when I ask questions, I won't be identifying who actually asked the question. So with that housekeeping out of the order, I won't spend too many minutes talking about the intro, as it were. You're all here to listen to Maria, but I will say this. Watching Trump and his supporters say and do one thing after another, which would have derailed any other administration and ensure there was no hope for re-election. It has become abundantly clear that Trump has a core group of supporters, which, as he actually already said in January 2016, would support him even if he shot someone in daylight on Fifth Avenue. I mean, it seemed like a kind of a bad joke and something a campaigner shouldn't say. But it turns out maybe Trump actually understood part of his core supporting group quite well. Now, one might fairly ask, who are these people? Since it's not a marginal group, it's about a third to 2/5 of the voting population, as it were. Now, to answer this, because the answer is quite a bit more complex than the initial, shall we say, analyses after the election 2016, we have Maria Annala. She spent the last year at FIIA as a visiting research fellow. Before that, she spent about 4 years in the US. She was writing on politics, things, to the Finnish news bureau STT and London Media. Most importantly, though, is she lived through Trump's first campaign and a good bit into, of course, his first administration. And one of the outcomes of this is a book that Maria published, or in fact, Into Kustannus published, but Maria wrote, came out in January. It is in Finnish, and its title is translated approximately to Trump's people. Who are they, and why do they love their leader? With that, I'm going to hand off to Maria. Take it away.
Thank you, Charly. I have an American friend named Alice, who is a sweet grandmother in her mid-70s, a charismatic, natural-born leader, a cosmopolite who has lived on 4 continents, and the most passionate Trump supporter I have ever met. Alice became a Trump supporter early on in the 2016 campaign, and soon she had given up her job and dedicated her entire life to helping Trump win the White House. And although Alice might not be your stereotypical Trump supporter, I'm about to show you that she is, in fact, a very typical Trump supporter. There's been a lot of research into who voted for Trump in 2016 and why. And that research has shown us that there are 6 characteristics that are all common amongst the people who voted for him. First of all, we know that a lot of Trump voters and Trump supporters are socially conservative Christians. That's definitely Alice. She was born and raised Catholic in Ireland. She prays every day, and socially conservative values are very important to her. A lot of people have been wondering why Trump, of all people, was able to appeal so much to this particular voter segment, despite his divorces, his well-documented extramarital affairs, his swearing, his casinos. Why this candidate? But Alice tells me God does not always send perfect people to do his work. Alice also talks to me about how Trump reminds her of Cyrus the Great, a biblical figure who was not Jewish himself, but who became an important political ally for the Jewish people. And that seems to be, according to research, how a lot of socially conservative American Christians view the Trump presidency. In very transactional terms, he might not be one of them, but he's somebody who has promised to look out for them and promised to make sure that their priorities are his priorities when doing politics. And that's enough. That's enough for them to support him. A second thing we know about Trump supporters is that a lot of them have anti-immigration and anti-immigrant sentiments. This is much less surprising, of course. After all, Trump launched his campaign in 2015 by coming down an escalator and insulting Mexicans. Later, he made it his signature campaign promise to build a wall on the southern border. And all in all, his campaign was full of attacks on immigration and immigrants. Now, Alice, as I mentioned, was born and raised in Ireland, so she's herself an immigrant. But she tells me, I came to this country legally, and I expect everyone to do the same. She's very upset to this day about some of the immigration policies of President Barack Obama, who she feels was way too lenient when it came to illegal immigration. Of course, some Trump supporters would also like to see a drastic reduction of legal immigration. There's a lot of different sentiments there, but some sort of anti-immigration sentiment is central to a lot of them. Third thing we know about Trump supporters and his 2016 voters is that a lot of them have negative views about Muslims and Islam. Again, not surprising. Trump attacked Muslims and Muslim immigration a lot of times over the course of his 2016 campaign. And with the help of Breitbart, the website, he was able to paint a picture of Muslim immigrants as terrorists, basically, and people who bring disease and all bad things to American soil. Now, Alice, I can't imagine her saying anything negative about a person based on their religion, but she does like to say that the US was founded on Judeo-Christian principles and that we should uphold these principles and cherish them. And when you read between the lines, what she's actually saying is that she wants Christianity to hold on to its powerful position in society and in American politics. She doesn't want anything to threaten that. And the more Muslim immigrants you get, the more pushback there's going to be against Christianity being so powerful in society. Therefore, Trump was quite genius in a way to target Muslims so much in his campaign rhetoric, because that way he was able to appeal to two important voter segments, the people who are against immigration and the socially conservative Christians. And of course, there's overlap between these two groups as well. So that was a very powerful argument for him, and it played out well for him. Fourth thing we know about Trump supporters is that a lot of them are racist. And when I say racist, I don't necessarily mean white supremacists or people who go around saying bad things about Black people or claiming that white people are better. A lot of American racism is much more subtle than that. It's subconscious. We're talking about people who would vehemently deny being racist if you asked them. But there are people who refuse to acknowledge institutional racism, for example. They refuse to acknowledge that something needs to be done to help Black people and other non-white Americans succeed in life and have a good life in the US. Alice told me once that the US no longer had a problem with racism. The problem with racism was long gone until Barack Obama brought it back. And I was a bit shocked to hear that at first. But when we talked more about race, I began to realize that Alice is one of those Americans who are sometimes called colorblind. It's a way of thinking, usually for a white American, where a person says that it's impolite to even notice the color of anyone's skin. that we should all just go around pretending that we don't see race, we don't see color, we shouldn't talk about it, we should just ignore the fact that people have different ethnicities. And it may be well intended. I'm sure at least sometimes it is. But the problem with that kind of thinking is that these people are also denying the racial disparities. They're denying institutional racism. They're opposing policies that are designed to help the disadvantaged racial and ethnic groups have a better life. So these kind of people, Trump was definitely able to appeal to. Fifth thing we know about Trump supporters and his 2016 voters is that a lot of them are opposed to gender equality. And this is interesting because I think this is a big mistake a lot of us made before the 2016 elections when we were trying to assess Trump's chances of getting elected. A lot of us, me included, were thinking and saying, Trump can't win because he's never going to get enough vote from women. Women are not going to vote for someone like Trump. Alice knew better. When Alice decided to dedicate her life to campaigning for Trump, what she did was start an organization that was entirely meant for women, a women's grassroots campaign organization called Virginia Women for Trump, because she believed and knew there were a lot of women out there who would find Trump's message appealing. And I think why me and so many other people got it wrong is that we kind of forgot we were looking at it from our own bubbles. People who get a job where they get to comment American politics in public to a national or international audience, we tend to be educated, live in cities. We're usually people who are surrounded with women who are educated, ambitious about their careers, possibly define ourselves as feminist. And it's hard to remember that that is definitely not all American women. There is a lot of women in the US who have a totally different opinion, who value traditional gender roles, the so-called traditional family values. But Alice knew this. She had friends like this. Some researchers call Trump supporters misogynist, but I think that's going too far. We must not forget that a lot of Trump voters who have these anti-equality opinions and attitudes are women themselves. They don't hate women. They just want traditional gender roles, or at least different gender roles than the ones socially liberal people are pushing for. Like Alice, for example, she has no problem being a powerhouse, being this very influential grassroots campaigner. She doesn't want to just sit at home and knit a sock, but she also doesn't feel that a woman necessarily needs to be president. And she wants men to change light bulbs and open doors for her. She feels that the Me Too movement is a little problematic and scary because it's creating this environment where men might be afraid to even compliment a woman on the way they're dressed. She just has this very different attitude. And there are a lot of women out there in the US who feel this way. And Trump, his attitudes about women were not a problem to these women at all. And the sixth thing we know about Trump supporters and Trump's 2016 voters is that a lot of them have what researchers call an authoritarian mindset. And that means that they tend to divide the world and people into groups of us and them. And what they're looking for in a president is a strong leader, a powerful strongman who is one of us and will protect us from them. And Trump definitely fit the bill. He's very polarizing. He's always leaning into this, using these us versus them divides, clearly picking a side. And he was able to portray this message, convey this message that he would be one of these authoritarians, one of these people, and that he would protect them from outgroups. Now, Alice, she doesn't strike me as an authoritarian person, but when I talked to her about raising her sons, her 3 sons, she kept saying things that were literally like straight from the questionnaire researchers use to define whether somebody has an authoritarian mindset. It's usually defined by these questions that have to do with how to bring up a child. And Alice was just spontaneously basically listing almost all the points the researchers are trying to get the research subjects to say to define if they have an authoritarian mindset. So apparently she does. So these are the 6 things research has shown about Trump supporters. They're socially conservative Christians, they have negative opinions about immigration and Muslims, they're racist, they're against gender equality, and a lot of them have an authoritarian mindset. As we can see, all of these characteristics have to do with identities. They're not income or education level or that kind of background factors. We're deep in a person's identity. And another noteworthy point about all these is that we're describing a person who has a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, in making sure that the power rests in the hands that have always held it. We're talking about a person who is opposed to a more pluralistic society where all kinds of minorities have a say. But what does that tell us about Trump's re-election chances? Now that's been a wild ride. When I was finishing up my book, a little before Christmas last year, Trump's re-election chances looked really good. He had really delivered for all of these groups of people that I've described here. From the media, you might get this feeling that the Trump presidency has been all about failures and chaos and scandals and mistakes. But in fact, he has been able to deliver, and he's been very consistent in looking out for his core supporters. He has nominated a lot of federal judges and 2 socially conservative Supreme Court justices. He's been reliably anti-abortion. He has been reliably anti-immigration, and he's been able to secure several big wins with the help of Supreme Court. Even though he's been challenged, Supreme Court has sided with him. He has acted very authoritarian. He has been happy to pick sides and very clearly picked sides and tried to protect his in-groups from outsiders. His law and order message is targeted to these subconscious racists. What better than to have the president define all the Black Lives Matter protesters as looters and troublemakers? Because it's so much nicer to be on the side of law and order, a good citizen, than to actually admit to oneself that one might deep down be threatened by these protests because one wants white people to stay in power. So Trump has really given these people a lot, and I expected them to support him. But then, as we all know, something dramatic happened this year, when the global pandemic hit. And soon after that, we began to see that Trump's leadership was not what Americans wanted in times of a global massive health crisis, which makes perfect sense. I feel that the pandemic is possibly the worst kind of adversary for a leader like Trump for 2 reasons. Because of his aversion to experts and expertise, and because of his post-truth communication strategy. Trump likes to go with his gut. He doesn't like to listen to experts. And he says whatever pops in his mind, if it sounds like something that's beneficial to him in that particular moment, without caring at all whether it's true or not, or whether he even knows if it's true or not, or whether somebody might call him out on speaking untruths. And we can see clearly from the polls that in times of a global pandemic, that is not what Americans want from their leader. They would probably rather have someone who gives them actual facts they can rely on and who listens to experts when deciding on policy related to the pandemic. But I've kept saying it's too early. It's too early to say who's going to win. There might still be game changers. And now, late last week, we had another tragic game changer. The death of esteemed Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And now it's very interesting to see how all that plays into the Trump campaign. But I say it's definitely a stroke of luck for him. For one thing, it was his single most important campaign promise that he would nominate socially conservative Supreme Court justices and other federal judges. And he has already delivered. He has delivered so much to the people who wanted to see the court become more socially conservative. But the thing is, voters have a short memory. And lately, people have been much more focused on the pandemic than the court. But now everybody's talking about the court again. And if Trump is able to nominate one more justice right before the election, that's going to be on top of everybody's minds when they go and cast their vote. And even if he's not able to nominate someone this quickly, the conversation has clearly shifted now. Now we're talking about all these identity relevant things again. The Americans are talking about abortion. They're talking about LGBTQ rights. They're talking about things that go deep into the identity questions that were so relevant to Trump's first victory. And that is all a win to him. Everything that shifts the conversation away from the pandemic and to matters that he is much stronger on, everything is beneficial to him. But one interesting thing is that it's also possible that this Supreme Court debate will really energize the Democratic voters. In 2016, we could clearly see that the Republican voters were much more aware of how important the Supreme Court question was. There were a lot of Trump voters who didn't actually like Trump, but who voted for him just to get socially conservative Supreme Court justices. Whereas on the Democratic side, you saw a lot of people who just didn't go and vote at all if they didn't like Hillary Clinton. They didn't see the court question, the Supreme Court question, important enough to overcome their aversion to Hillary Clinton. And I think that's because a lot of socially liberal Americans had sort of this false consciousness, this false idea that hard-fought rights and liberal progress was not going to go away, that the abortion rights and the LGBTQ rights and all kinds of equality issues that had been accomplished over the years, that they were guaranteed to stay that way, that there was no way anyone would be able to dismantle them. But I think this Trump presidency and the reshaping of the courts and now the fight over who is going to be the next Supreme Court justice is finally making Democratic and Democratic-leaning voters wake up to the fact that things can go back. There can be steps back to the opposite direction. There could be reversal of Supreme Court decisions that guaranteed equal rights to same-sex marriage and abortion in all the different American states, for example. And I think that is really going to energize the Democratic voters. So all in all, I still claim that it's impossible to say whether Trump or Joe Biden is going to win. But the reason the Supreme Court question is so important is that I believe that all of this will boil down to two questions. Which people decide to vote and which ones will be able to do so? Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Which people will decide to vote and who gets to vote? We have seen some, how should I put it, interesting news about this already for some time, and every day there seems to be some little detail in both directions. I'll just give you one example to let everyone start typing in their messages and questions. yesterday, probably, yes. Sometimes it's a little hard to remember which day it was looking at US news from Finland. There was a news flash that Bloomberg, former Democratic candidate, through him, in fact, some 30,000 Florida convicted felons who had served their time but had outstanding fines, which, according to new Florida law, would disenfranchise them. So in effect, Bloomberg said, fine, I'll pay all these people's fines, which is about 30,000 voters. Not a lot, but in Florida, it's not unclear. The end tallies may differ by some hundreds or thousands of votes. So 30,000 may actually be quite big in that. But this is just one example of the many different ways of how people may want to vote, may try to vote, and in the end not have their votes counted. A thing which isn't a surprise to anyone who follows US politics, but again, sitting in Finland is a rather odd example of a modern democracy. Now, so far I am seeing no questions here on the chat. I will start with one comment first and then a question. The comment is actually just to underline something that Maria said. It's from a Pew study just some months back. This has to do with institutional racism, a sense of whether or not there's a equal society in terms of opportunity for men and women. Two questions were asked, a lot more, but the ones I'll bring up. One is it a lot more difficult to be a black person in this country than it is to be a white person? Among Trump voters, 9% thought so, indicating some sense of institutional racism. Among Biden, or shall we say likely Biden voters, 74%. Then, when asked whether women today still face significant obstacles that make it harder for them to get ahead than men, so an equality question from that perspective. Trump voters, 26%, and Biden or prospective Biden voters, 79%. So clearly very different perspectives on the institutional nature. Now, this isn't surprising, being that in a way, the modern Republican Party has at least been built on the rhetorical ideology of every person makes their own fortune. Whether or not this has been the reality is a different discussion. So in some way, the results are not surprising and entirely support the story of Alice and the other interviews Maria did. Then my question, when you talk to the Trump supporters, how did the idea, or did it, of a world outside the US come up? Was it only immigrants and people from Mexico coming? Or was there any sense or care about what we might call foreign policy or trade or anything like that?
Yes, definitely. These were all the three people that I did in-depth interviews with for my book. They were all very educated people who followed the news and who were interested in also the world outside of the US. Alice had a lot to say about how she objected to Obama's foreign policy. She felt that Obama was too humble, too sort of, she would say, ashamed of his own country, unpatriotic is what she would say. Sort of coming to the table as an equal is what I would say. Trying to have a discussion with other countries, not just dictating that we're a big country and we get to say everything and you should just follow what we say, but instead sort of sitting at a table as an equal and having a conversation with other countries and trying to do things like fight climate change together with the rest of the world. So Alice did not see this as a positive. She felt that Obama was just like being too embarrassed of the US to really tell everybody how great it is. Alice also had interesting things to say about Norway, which I feel that also applied to Finland, even though she kept talking about Norway. She said that in Norway, the way the system is built is that everybody's allowed to have a decent life, an okay-ish life, but no one really has the opportunity to aspire greatness, aspire material wealth, aspire success. And everybody just has to sort of be content with having more or less the same as their neighbor. And that, to her, that sounds a lot like socialism, and that has no place in the US. And she even called Norway a socialist country, I recall. And it was interesting to listen to that, because having lived in the US, I kind of see where she's coming from in thinking about Finland. In Finland, if somebody is better off than their neighbors, they're not supposed to buy a flashy car and go around saying that, look at me, I'm so proud of myself, I'm a self-made man or a self-made woman, like you would in the US. You're more supposed to try and hide it and sort of make sure that your standard of living isn't higher than everybody else's. And in Finland, we feel that people would be envious and feel bad if their neighbor had a fancy car. But in the US, it's not that uncommon for a person who is actually really badly off financially to feel that the Kardashians are so cool because they give me something to aspire to. They make me think that someday I could be mega rich and have a mansion and have a fortune. So they have a very different approach to this unequal distribution of wealth question, for example. That's maybe kind of beside the point, speaking of foreign politics, but you did ask if they talked about other countries, so I thought that was interesting.
It certainly is, and it also is a reminder of an interesting mix of, for various reasons, a rejection of socialism and a strong belief in the kind of American way of life, which enables you to climb from the very bottom rungs of a hierarchy to the very top, and then comparing it to actual research results in looking at kind of societal mobility. But that's probably a topic for another webinar. We have a few questions here. Because it's related, I'll take this one first. It says, how do Trump supporters view climate change and climate policy?
Yes, that reminds me of a reporting trip I took to this mining village. This is not from my book, but it's relevant to this topic. I interviewed a lot of miners and other people who were living in this very poor mining village. And they all kept saying that, they kept finding justifications not to care about climate change. For example, that it doesn't matter what we do because China is the biggest polluter anyway. And I understand why they do it. They live in these villages where if the mines close down, those are the only employers in the whole village. All the other services are centered around catering for the mining families. Like, for example, there's a grocery store and a doctor and a school, but that's all because the mines are there. If the mines close down, the villages become ghost villages. Everybody has to move out. And they love those areas. They love those villages. Their family has lived there for generations. And also, if the village becomes a ghost village, their property becomes worthless. So then they would have to move and they wouldn't have a dime to start over with. So I get that these people are looking for justification. And to them, Trump is a hero because Trump has promised to look out for the miner and to bring about this renaissance of coal mining. But when it comes to other Trump supporters, people whose livelihoods aren't so closely tied to polluting, there's been research that shows that a lot of Trump voters, the 2016 voters, it's not that they're opposed to environmental protection. It's more just that it's not a big issue for them. It really was a non-issue in the entire 2016 campaign. When there were debates between Trump and Hillary Clinton, the journalists never bothered to ask anything about climate change or environmental politics. It just didn't come up. The Americans were sort of sleeping there. They were not that interested in the issue altogether. And when Trump talks about environment, he likes to juxtapose it with economic growth and paint all these environmental protection regulations as things that are hindering economic growth and hindering business. So then the people are, in their view, they're pro-business and not anti-environment.
Right, and I'll add, I couldn't resist looking up here while asking again some Pew numbers, and there's a general trend among the U.S. population of being more concerned with climate change. But it's basically led by an increase of concern by those who would lean or vote for Democrat, where it's gone up in about a decade. It's gone up from about 6 in 10 to 9 in 10 Democrats. Republicans, it's basically stayed at between 25 and 30%. So there is one, it just, as many things, there's a partisan sense for it. And the partisan lean is even more apparent when one is asked, is it a top priority? Should something be done about it? Where there's about a 60% percentage point gap between Republican and Democratic voters on it. So let me go then. There are a bunch of other questions which one can also see. This one, do any Trump voters, do you think they feel betrayed by President Trump? You suggested he has actually done a lot of things for them, but do you think there's any of these groups that you described that might be a little bit concerned?
I think mostly they do not. There's always somebody, and then there's always the journalist who finds that one person and makes a huge article out of them because the journalist herself or himself doesn't like Trump. But all in all, my feeling is that most Trump supporters, especially the actual supporters, not just the people who voted for him, even though they didn't like him, but the actual supporters, I think most of them are very happy with him. They are very focused on everything he has accomplished. And when there's something they're disappointed with, they just brush it off as the Democrats didn't let him do what he wanted. The Democrats kept getting in the way. So I really don't think there's a lot of Trump supporters who are disappointed.
With that, the question about whether the Republican Party has become a completely Trumpist party, or is there still an old school Republicans? Some might laugh at Reagan Republicans being viewed as old school, but probably in that direction. And how do you think this might affect policy, domestic or foreign policy, if kind of not only Trump, but Trumpism is the driving force and ideology?
I believe there are factions within the Republican Party that are not Trumpist, in the sense that once Trump's time as president is gone, we might see a lot of competition for what kind of a Republican Party we will have after Trump. But right now, he is really, like, his position is so unchallenged that at the moment, it's very hard to find Republicans who would take a stand against him while he's still in power.
Right. Related to this, eventually we think there's going to be a time after Trump. We probably hope so, some sooner than later. Do you see any figures that might continue this or be a second Trump, continue the Trumpism, as it were, if this groundwork has been laid, as you said? I mean, people talk about, Jared Kushner or Ivanka Trump or someone like that. But do you have any sense, is this even possible, or is in many ways Trump sui generis in this?
I think Trump is unique, but I also think we might be seeing some kind of a Trump 2.0, someone who takes some pages of his playbook, but does it in a different way. For example, somebody who actually knows more about politics than Trump did, who doesn't have such a clear outsider card, but who sort of understands these identity issues, the identity politics that I've been talking about here today, and who is able to find some other way to tap into those same groups of voters and appeal to them. Possibly somebody who also uses these like post-truth communication strategies and just goes around saying whatever they please, but it will have to be somebody who is somehow different enough and charismatic enough to pull it off. It can't be just anybody. And no, I don't have anyone in mind right now. There have been some politicians who have tried to be Trumpier than Trump himself, but the ones I'm thinking of have not had enough success to be relevant, as for example, in the future presidential elections. So if there is going to be a Trump 2.0, I think it's someone who's probably still sort of bubbling under. It's probably not someone we've heard of as of yet.
All right. Well, one I guess group of actors that might be relevant in this person going from bubbling under to someone we might recognize, and to Trump, of course, is media. The question is, what kind of roles do American media, parentheses, Fox News and social media, play in the election this time? And maybe also more broadly, because based on research, the two media spheres that Biden and Trump voters look at, they don't differ just in terms of names, but in the actual content, in terms of how much one listens to traditional media versus WhatsApp groups, other social media, etc.
Yes, I actually looked into research on that question as well in my book. And there has been a great research project where they looked at millions of news articles and were able to prove, without a doubt, in my opinion, that the right-wing media ecosystem really is totally different from the rest of the American media. It doesn't subscribe to the traditional rules of journalism. It really isn't even journalism. It's propaganda, it's spinning misinformation, coming up with these stories where there's a little bit of truth and then the rest is just made up stuff and blatant lies to confuse the voters. And this media ecosystem is very consistent if you live inside that bubble. One of them comes up with a story, another one picks it up, reinforces it, adds their own little lies to the mix, amplifies it, and they all end up repeating the same disinformation, which makes it effective, because for somebody who believes these outlets and follows them, they keep hearing the same message over and over when it becomes more, and then it becomes more and more convincing to their ears. And that's really scary, because I think we've reached a point where the American voters don't really even have the same basic facts in order to have a conversation. You can't really have a conversation if you can't even agree on the basic fundamental facts, if one side is using alternative facts. And that is what the media ecosystem is doing. And social media is part of this, of course, because people like to share the articles that they are passionate about. And the right-wing, this misinformation, fake journalism is very good at producing headlines and articles that people are inclined to share in social media and that are inclined to get a lot of social media reactions, which the social media algorithms then interpret as, this is important, this is interesting, we need to push this to more viewers. And then those misinformation pieces get much more attention in social media than the actual good quality journalism pieces that might be important for everybody to read to have an understanding of what the candidates are all about.
Okay. And that echoes some studies where, say, about 25 to 30% of population, or those asked in the polls or studies, agreed with the statement that Americans still had a kind of a shared sense of facts upon which to discuss. And of course, if only about a quarter of your population shares an idea, then it's quite difficult to have a reasonable conversation about policy, but also identity, structural issues, etc. Um, Go back to something you said. Here's a question. Said that Trump supporters don't feel betrayed. What would be something, or do you think there's something that could, so to speak, break the camel's back to get his supporters to abandon him?
Well, if we're talking about the socially conservative Christians, if he were to nominate a liberal Supreme Court justice, that would definitely be something that would get a lot of people to turn their backs. Or if he suddenly, some people have been saying that who knows what he's going to do if he gets a second term. Maybe he's going to start listening to his daughter more and start actually enacting socially liberal policies. If he were to start taking totally different, opposite positions on immigration politics, for example, and trying to create pathways to citizenship for illegal immigrants, or like a total U-turn on one of the signature issues that his supporters are passionate about. I think that would be something that would really get them to turn away from him. But other than that, I really don't think so. Not something like what Charly said in the beginning, the famous Trump quote where he said he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and his supporters wouldn't abandon him. I think that's true. I don't think they're going to abandon him as long as he keeps delivering the kind of policies that appeal to their identities.
Right. A question here of Corona and its impact on Trump supporters. I'll expand it on a little based on what you said. So at least a number of polls suggest that Trump's handling of Corona has not been tremendously damaging, again, regarding his core. But for those who might think about it, and there's some indication in the poll that there are some people who say, well, this has been such a tremendous failure that I have to consider this in my decision on who I vote on. Do you get a sense that of again, this group of different categories of Trump voters, that they would just say, that was Corona, once in a lifetime thing, it's can't do anything about it? Or would this critical sense of Trump's leadership actually transfer to other policy areas? Would they make the jump that he's a bad leader here, if there's something else that I find important, he would be bad there? Or would we again see this case of, yeah, I don't like that, but let me box it in so I don't actually have to change my vote?
I think mostly the latter. Again, when we're talking about his core supporters, the passionate supporters, I think they're going to say, well, this is like an act of God. Nothing could be done about it. It's something that no one could have handled better. Or they're going to say that it's just this one thing and it doesn't really change everything he's accomplished. Or like you said, just box it in. But as I've pointed out before, not all Trump voters, the 2016 voters, not all of them are actual Trump supporters. He had a lot of voters who didn't even like him, who just voted for him to get the justices or for some other, because they hated Hillary Clinton. And for these people who are not passionate about Trump, this might actually be the decisive factor, that they're just so fed up with how he's handled the pandemic that they want anybody but him in the White House. And yes, those people might also feel that he has proven to be a bad leader, and that transfers to other areas of politics and life as well. You're muted, Charly.
Yeah. As I'm waiting for a few questions, question on what then to maybe look at in these last few weeks in terms of shifts in Trump voter land. I ask because polls traditionally, for instance, didn't actually ask about educational background, because according to research, education did not correlate with party preference. It quite clearly does now to some degree, or it's at least a factor that must be considered, because otherwise your polling might be off even more than normal. So are there any things, what should we look for in the next weeks in terms of whether or not polling or other indicators of how Trump voters might be swinging? And alternatively, then if you can give some idea of how it might rile up or drive more voters into the Biden camp.
Well, that's a tricky question. I think that if there are polls that would somehow help us gauge whether the voters are thinking more about identities and culture wars or whether they're thinking more about the pandemic, that would be very interesting. And also if they feel sort of scared and threatened, because we've seen that Biden is, and if the economy is sort of on the top of their minds, we've seen that Trump gets better. He polls better than Biden when asked about who's the best for handling the economy. Then again, Biden polls better when people are asked how they feel about the pandemic and the handling of the pandemic. And now we have the Supreme Court question, which will divide the people very starkly to those who feel that Trump has the right values to move America forward and shape the Supreme Court, and then those who feel that it's Biden. And I think really interesting would be to know what the voters are thinking about. Like, for example, if the pollster asked, what is the most important thing when deciding who your vote goes to? That would be interesting. If people either just said something off the top of their heads, or even if they were read out aloud a list of different factors and they got to say what was the most important one. And also just sort of how this whole Supreme Court's fight is going to go is going to be interesting. If Trump, he's in such a haste now to nominate someone, to have his nominee confirmed before the election, that he might skip some of the vetting. He might end up picking someone who has skeletons in their closet. And in this polarized climate, if Trump's pick does have skeletons in their closet, you can be sure that somebody is going to dig them out, because there's going to be somebody who doesn't want him to confirm anybody before the election, who is going to know about these skeletons and who is going to have a huge interest in making sure all the world knows about that. So there might be like massive scandals ahead for whoever Trump picks if they have some skeletons in their closet. And I think when you look closely enough, most people do have at least something that you could build a nice scandal around. So that's also something that's going to be very interesting to watch in the weeks to come.
All right. Thank you. We have one more question here. I might take a stab at it also. But the question is about Trump's support among law enforcement, armed forces, military, security agencies. My instant answer would be generally they tend to be more conservative. But on the other hand, especially the armed forces and security agencies, which might be interpreted as intelligence community, being that law enforcement is separate from there, he has done his utmost to alienate that group of people. And this can be seen particularly in the number of leaks and comments from people that usually do not say anything. That is recently retired generals or intelligence community members. And this to me suggests that he hasn't just annoyed them with some policy differences or choices a la Iraq war, but genuinely in how he and what he does. Of course, the intelligence agencies aren't such a big voting bloc. The armed forces in some states could be, if there's a small enough shift. There are military communities, whether or not it's in Carolinas or Florida, or some in remotely competitive Midwest states, where it might actually make a difference that a voting bloc that tended to vote conservative now wouldn't vote as much conservative. Maria, you have the last words.
Well, I totally agree with what you were saying. I don't know if I have anything to add to that. It's definitely true that these voting blocs tend to be conservative, but Trump has antagonized a lot of them. And then there's also Biden, who actually has a long history collaborating with the police and being friend of men in uniform, the police specifically. And that's being used against him now in the context of Black Lives Matter. But it's still something that for the people on the other side, on the side where they take sides and side with the police, they might feel that it's a good thing about Biden that he has this history of collaboration. So who knows? There might be some interesting shifts there, definitely.
All right. Well, that I think I will thank all of the participants, especially Maria, for a great dive into Trump voters, real people, not caricatures. And I think it's one of the strengths at the Institute that we have such a broad range of people and expertise who work here. It at least makes my life considerably more enjoyable to be surrounded by these great colleagues. So thank you, Maria. Thank you to all the participants, and send us more questions via email or Twitter or wherever else you want to contact us. Have a good day.
Thanks.
The webinar is over.
Thank you. Bye-bye.